If you want the truth, sometimes you have to commit the one crime no one will ever forgive. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the rooftops of Blackridge when Evelyn Carter tightened her grip on the worn leather reins and urged the magnificent stallion forward. Gasps rolled through the crowded market square as the towering white horse, draped in the midnight blue colors of the Alpha King, surged between wagons loaded with apples, flour, and fresh-cut timber. Merchants abandoned their booths. Children froze with wide eyes. Royal guards shouted orders that echoed against the stone buildings, but Evelyn never looked back. Every heartbeat carried the weight of a secret she wished she had never uncovered. Behind her, armored riders mounted their own horses, determined to recover the king's prized companion before the thief disappeared beyond the eastern gate. Yet Evelyn had no intention of escaping. She wanted to be caught. She only needed enough time to make sure the Alpha King himself would have no choice but to hear her. The stallion thundered across the square before she pulled gently on the reins, guiding the powerful animal onto the ancient fountain at the town's center. Water shimmered beneath the early morning sun as nearly every citizen gathered below, whispering in disbelief. Some recognized Evelyn immediately. She was the quiet seamstress who lived near the old mill, the woman who smiled at strangers and always paid her debts on time. No one could understand why someone so ordinary would risk everything for a horse. A captain of the royal guard pointed his spear toward her, though his voice remained steady. "Step down, and this ends peacefully." Evelyn met his eyes without fear. "Tell your king," she called, her voice carrying farther than she expected, "that I will return his horse the moment he listens to what I discovered." Silence swept across the square. Even the restless stallion lowered its head, as if sensing the strange gravity surrounding the woman on its back. The captain frowned. "You have exactly 1 minute before more guards arrive." Evelyn nodded slowly, but inside her pulse raced. She had counted every possible outcome over the past 3 sleepless nights. None ended well. If the king refused to believe her, she would lose everything. If he believed her, another family might be torn apart forever. She closed her eyes for the briefest moment, remembering the hidden room beneath her little farmhouse, the faded royal crest carved into an old wooden chest, and the quiet man she had called her husband for nearly 3 years. Adrian Blackwood had never lied to her about loving her, but he had hidden something far greater than his own name. 3 days earlier, life had still felt wonderfully ordinary. Evelyn Carter woke each morning before sunrise, opened the tiny windows of the farmhouse, and breathed in the cool scent of pine drifting from the hills beyond Blackridge. The house was small enough that she could cross it in less than 20 steps, yet every worn floorboard carried memories she treasured. The kitchen always smelled of fresh bread because Adrian insisted on baking before leaving for work. He claimed kneading dough cleared his thoughts better than any conversation ever could. Evelyn used to laugh that a man with hands strong enough to repair saddles could shape bread with such surprising care. Adrian would simply smile, brush flour from his sleeves, and quietly change the subject. That was the way he handled almost everything. He listened more than he spoke. He noticed details everyone else ignored. When an elderly neighbor struggled to carry water, Adrian was somehow already there. When children lost a wooden toy in the creek, he always found it before sunset. The entire village respected him, yet no one truly knew him. Whenever anyone asked where he had lived before arriving in Blackridge, his answer never changed. "Far enough away that I wanted a fresh start." Most people accepted that simple explanation. Evelyn had accepted it too. Love did not require knowing every chapter that came before. At least that was what she believed. Their evenings followed the same peaceful rhythm. Adrian repaired saddles and bridles beside the fireplace while Evelyn stitched dresses and blankets under the warm glow of an oil lamp. Sometimes they spoke for hours about ordinary dreams. They imagined planting an apple orchard behind the barn. They imagined saving enough money to build a larger porch where they could watch summer storms roll across the valley. Other nights they simply enjoyed the silence, a silence that never felt empty. Yet there were small moments that refused to fit the life they had built together. Adrian could recognize the crest of every noble family with only a quick glance. He knew the names of distant mountain passes that ordinary travelers had never seen. Once, during the annual harvest festival, the village blacksmith proudly displayed a ceremonial sword that had supposedly belonged to a famous royal commander. Adrian examined it for only a second before quietly pointing out that the engraving belonged to a different generation entirely. The blacksmith insisted he was wrong until a visiting historian confirmed Adrian had been correct. When Evelyn asked how he knew so much, he smiled without answering. Another evening she woke after midnight and found his side of the bed empty. She discovered him standing outside beneath the moon, staring toward the distant towers of the royal capital nearly 30 miles away. His expression held a sadness she had never seen before. When she wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and asked what troubled him, he gently kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sometimes the past remembers us even when we try to forget it." She thought he was speaking like a poet. Now she wondered if he had been confessing something she had failed to hear. The questions continued to gather like quiet clouds, each too small to seem important on its own. Evelyn never imagined they were leading her toward a single discovery that would change not only her marriage, but the fate of the entire kingdom. The morning everything changed began with nothing more dramatic than a missing jar of sewing needles. Evelyn searched every shelf in the farmhouse before remembering that Adrian had asked her to organize the old storage room beneath the barn, while he delivered a repaired saddle to a neighboring ranch. Smiling to herself, she carried a lantern across the yard, unlocked the weathered wooden door, and stepped into the cool underground space. Dust floated through thin beams of sunlight that slipped between the floorboards above. Wooden crates lined the stone walls, filled with blankets, spare tools, and supplies collected over the years. She hummed quietly while sorting boxes, occasionally setting aside items they no longer needed. Near the back of the room, she noticed something unusual. One shelving unit stood perfectly straight while every other piece of furniture leaned slightly with age. Curious, she pressed against its side. To her surprise, it shifted several inches, revealing a narrow doorway hidden behind the shelves. Her heartbeat quickened. Adrian had never mentioned another room. Holding the lantern higher, she stepped through the opening. The air inside felt colder, untouched for years. The chamber was small, no larger than a bedroom, yet everything inside had been arranged with remarkable care. A polished wooden chest rested beneath a faded banner embroidered with a silver wolf surrounded by a ring of stars. Beside it stood an elegant sword secured inside a leather case. Its handle carried intricate carvings unlike anything she had ever seen in Blackridge. On a nearby table rested rolled maps marked with handwritten notes, sealed letters tied with deep blue ribbon, and a heavy signet ring engraved with the same silver wolf crest. Evelyn picked up the ring carefully. It felt far too valuable to belong to a village saddle maker. Beneath it lay a folded parchment. She hesitated only a moment before opening it. The elegant handwriting spoke of border patrols, royal councils, and reports prepared for someone addressed only as Your Highness. Another document listed noble family names she recognized from traveling merchants. Every page seemed connected to the royal court. Confused, she reached for the wooden chest. It was unlocked. Inside rested a carefully folded black cloak trimmed with silver thread. As she lifted it, sunlight caught a finely stitched royal crest hidden beneath the collar. Her breath caught. She had seen that emblem only once before, embroidered on banners during the Alpha King's procession through a neighboring province years earlier. Suddenly footsteps echoed. Above her, Adrian had returned much earlier than expected. Evelyn quickly placed the cloak back into the chest, but before she could close the lid, his calm voice came from the doorway behind her. "I hoped you would never find this room." She turned slowly. Adrian stood motionless, his face strangely pale. For the first time since she had known him, the quiet confidence that always steadied him had disappeared. His eyes moved across the maps, the letters, and finally the ring still resting in her trembling hand. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. Finally Evelyn found her voice, though it barely rose above a whisper. "Who are you, Adrian?" He closed his eyes for a brief moment before answering with heartbreaking honesty. "The man who loves you is real. Everything else is far more complicated than I ever wanted you to carry." Adrian did not reach for the ring or the letters. Instead, he looked only at Evelyn, as though nothing else in the hidden room mattered. "Please," he said quietly, "leave this alone." She searched his face for the familiar warmth that had always made every difficult day seem smaller. But now she saw something she had never noticed before. Fear. Not fear for himself, but fear for her. You have hidden an entire life from me, she whispered. How can you ask me to walk away? Adrian lowered his eyes. Because the truth is dangerous, and once you know it, you cannot unknow it. Evelyn wanted answers, yet every question seemed to lead to another mystery. Are those royal letters yours? She asked. He remained silent. Does that crest belong to you? Still nothing. Finally she asked the question that had been growing heavier with every heartbeat. Are you hiding from the Alpha King? Adrian looked toward the faded banner hanging above the chest before answering. No. Relief washed over her for only an instant. Then he added, I have never been hiding from him. The words made even less sense. Before she could press further, Adrian stepped closer. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Promise me you will trust the man you married, even if you cannot yet trust the story. Evelyn wanted to believe him. Every memory of their life together reminded her of his kindness, his patience, and the quiet way he always placed others before himself. Yet the hidden chamber beneath their own home stood as undeniable proof that he had built their marriage upon secrets. That afternoon neither of them spoke very much. Adrian returned the maps and documents to the chest with careful hands before sealing the hidden room once again. They ate dinner in near silence. The familiar farmhouse suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every wall hiding questions she could no longer ignore. Long after Adrian had fallen asleep, Evelyn lay awake staring at the ceiling. His final words echoed endlessly through her thoughts. Trust the man you married. She wanted to. She truly did. But trust could not erase the royal crest she had held in her own hands. The next morning, while Adrian traveled to another village to deliver repaired tack, Evelyn made a decision she never imagined she would make. She walked to the town hall and requested a private meeting with Sheriff Thomas Mercer, the most respected official in Blackridge. She carefully described the hidden room without accusing Adrian of any crime. The sheriff listened patiently until she mentioned the royal crest. Then to her surprise he smiled. You have been reading too many adventure stories, he said. Your husband fixes saddles for a living. He is one of the most dependable men in this valley. Evelyn insisted she had seen official letters and a noble signet ring with her own eyes. Sheriff Mercer folded his hands across the desk. If every old family heirloom made someone royalty, half this county would be wearing crowns. His polite smile remained, but his voice grew firmer. Go home, Mrs. Blackwood. Your husband has earned this town's trust. Do not damage his good name with impossible rumors. As she stepped outside, two deputies standing near the entrance exchanged amused glances. One of them quietly muttered, Imagine believing a saddle maker belongs in the royal court. The other chuckled before returning to his work. Evelyn continued down Main Street, her face warm with embarrassment, but the uneasy feeling inside her only grew stronger. If no one would believe what she had already seen, how could she ever uncover the truth that Adrian was still trying so desperately to protect? By sunset, Evelyn understood something that frightened her more than the hidden room itself. The truth was trapped behind walls no ordinary person could cross. The sheriff had dismissed her concerns. The village trusted Adrian completely. Even if she carried the royal signet ring through every street in Blackridge, people would simply assume it was a family keepsake or a clever forgery. She returned home before Adrian did and stood alone beside the kitchen window, watching the evening light settle across the fields. She did not believe her husband was a dangerous man. Every instinct told her otherwise. But if he truly belonged to the royal court, why had he disappeared into the life of a humble craftsman? And why had he hidden everything from the one person he claimed to love? When Adrian finally returned, he greeted her with the same gentle smile that had always warmed the little farmhouse. For a brief moment she almost abandoned every question. She nearly convinced herself that love was enough. Then she noticed something tucked beneath his saddle blanket as he led his horse into the barn. It was a folded piece of parchment sealed with dark blue wax. Adrian slipped it into his coat before he realized she had seen it. Neither of them mentioned it during supper. They spoke instead about the weather, the wheat harvest, and a neighbor whose fence needed repairing. The ordinary conversation somehow made the silence between them even heavier. Late that night, after Adrian had fallen asleep, Evelyn quietly rose from bed and walked onto the porch. Above her, countless stars stretched across the clear sky. Somewhere beyond the distant mountains stood the royal capital, where every answer she needed seemed to be waiting. She remembered something an elderly merchant had mentioned earlier that week. The Alpha King would ride through Blackridge at sunrise on his way to inspect the northern border. The royal procession would stop only briefly to water the horses before continuing east. A single thought settled into her mind with startling clarity. If no one else would bring her to the king, then she would force destiny to carry her there. The idea sounded impossible, even reckless. She was not a soldier. She was not a noblewoman. She was simply a seamstress who had never broken a serious rule in her life. Yet every other path had already failed. She could not request an audience with the Alpha King. She would never be allowed through the lines of royal guards. There was only one thing valuable enough to make the king stop and listen: his favorite stallion. Evelyn spent the remaining hours of darkness planning every careful step. She studied the market square from her bedroom window, remembering exactly where the royal convoy usually paused. She knew she could not outrun trained riders for long, and she did not intend to. Her goal had never been escape. It was attention. At first light she dressed in her plain blue traveling coat, the one that allowed her to move freely, and quietly slipped out before Adrian awoke. As she crossed the dew-covered pasture, she paused only once to look back at the farmhouse they had built together. A single lamp still glowed inside the bedroom window. She whispered a soft apology that the morning breeze carried away before turning toward town. Whatever waited at the end of this road would change both their lives forever, but Evelyn believed that a painful truth was kinder than a peaceful lie, and before another sunrise passed, the entire kingdom would be forced to hear the question no one else had been willing to ask. The royal guards surrounded Evelyn within minutes, but exactly as she had expected, no one dared approach too quickly while the Alpha King's prize stallion stood calmly beneath her. The magnificent white horse never fought against her gentle hands. Instead, it breathed steadily, its silver mane drifting in the cool morning breeze as though it somehow sensed she meant no harm. Citizens filled every corner of the market square, whispering in disbelief. Some expected the guards to drag her away immediately. Others wondered whether fear had driven the quiet seamstress to lose all reason. Evelyn simply waited. Every passing second felt longer than the last. Then the murmuring crowd suddenly fell silent. A black carriage stopped at the edge of the square, followed by a line of mounted royal escorts. The carriage door opened, and a tall man stepped onto the cobblestones. He wore no jeweled crown, only a dark traveling coat fastened with a silver clasp shaped like a wolf. Yet no introduction was necessary. Every guard lowered his head. Every merchant stepped aside. Even the restless horses became strangely still. The Alpha King had arrived. His silver eyes rested first upon the stallion before slowly lifting to Evelyn. Unlike everyone else, he showed neither anger nor surprise. He studied her with quiet curiosity, as though trying to remember where he had seen her before. The captain of the guard stepped forward immediately. "Your Majesty, she stole your horse before sunrise and refused every order to surrender." The king raised one hand, and the captain fell silent at once. His calm voice carried easily across the square. "Why?" Evelyn swallowed the nervousness tightening her throat. "Because no one else would let me speak to you." The king's expression remained unreadable. "And what is worth frightening an entire town?" She carefully climbed down from the stallion and handed the reins to the nearest guard before answering. "My husband has been hiding something connected to the royal family, and every official I asked dismissed me before I could finish explaining." A ripple of quiet laughter spread through part of the crowd, but it disappeared almost instantly when the king did not smile. Instead, he asked one simple question. "Your husband's name?" "Adrian Blackwood," Evelyn answered without hesitation. The change in the king's face was almost impossible to notice, yet she saw it. His shoulders became perfectly still. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, not with suspicion but with recognition. He took one slow step toward her. "Describe him." Evelyn blinked in confusion. She had expected disbelief, perhaps even irritation, but never this. "Dark hair," she answered carefully. "Gray eyes. He repairs saddles. He speaks very little. Her voice softened. "He knows things no ordinary craftsman should know." The king remained silent for several long moments. Finally, He looked toward his captain. Clear the square. The order stunned everyone. Merchants, soldiers, and curious onlookers quietly withdrew until only a handful of trusted royal guards remained nearby. When the last spectator disappeared around the corner, the Alpha King turned back to Evelyn. His voice was quieter now, almost personal. 3 years ago, did your husband arrive in Blackridge alone? Evelyn nodded. Yes. The king closed his eyes briefly before releasing a slow breath. When he opened them again, the calm authority had given way to something far more human. Regret. Mrs. Blackwood, he said gently, I believe you have carried a burden that should never have become yours. And I fear the man you married has been protecting far more than a secret. The Alpha King remained silent until the last guard had stepped far enough away that no one else could hear. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine through the empty square, as he studied Evelyn with the careful attention of someone weighing every word before speaking. Your husband was never meant to disappear, he said at last. Evelyn felt her heart tighten. Then who is he? The king looked toward the eastern hills where sunlight spilled across the distant forests. His name is not Adrian Blackwood. He paused as though the next sentence carried years of unfinished sorrow. He was born Alexander Thornridge. Evelyn repeated the unfamiliar name under her breath. The king's eyes softened. My older brother. The world around her seemed to fall perfectly still. The bustling market, the horses, even the fluttering royal banners faded into the background as the words settled over her. Your brother, she whispered. The king nodded slowly. The firstborn son of our father. The rightful heir everyone expected to wear the crown. Evelyn struggled to understand. Then why are you the king? For the first time, the Alpha King looked less like a ruler and more like a younger brother carrying an old wound. Because Alexander refused the throne. She stared at him in disbelief. No one refuses a kingdom. Faint, bittersweet smile crossed his face. That is exactly what everyone believed. Which is why almost no one knows the truth. He folded his hands behind his back as though remembering another lifetime. Our father believed strength came only from fear. Alexander believed a ruler should protect even those who disagreed with him. They argued for years. Every council meeting became another battle of principles. When our father realized Alexander would never rule the way he demanded, he forced him to make an impossible choice. Accept the crown under his conditions or walk away forever. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Alexander chose neither power nor rebellion. He chose peace. He surrendered every title, every privilege, and every claim before dawn. He vanished before the court awakened, so that the kingdom would never be divided by two brothers. The king lowered his eyes for a brief moment. The crown passed to me because there was no one else. Evelyn remembered the quiet man who baked bread before sunrise, repaired worn saddles, and carried water for elderly neighbors without expecting thanks. None of those memories felt false anymore. They suddenly felt extraordinary. He never told me, she whispered. Of course he did not, the king replied gently. If anyone discovered he was alive, ambitious nobles would spend the rest of their lives trying to use him against the throne. He believed disappearing was the only way to protect the kingdom. Evelyn's thoughts raced back to the hidden room beneath the barn, the sealed letters, the carefully preserved cloak, and the sadness she had seen in Adrian's eyes whenever he looked toward the royal capital. They had never been trophies. They were pieces of a life he had sacrificed. The king reached into his coat and removed a small silver pendant engraved with the same wolf crest she had seen beneath the farmhouse. I have carried this for 3 years, he said quietly, hoping that one day my brother would decide to come home. Then he looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. Instead, it was his wife who found the courage to bring the truth to me. The Alpha King asked Evelyn to accompany him to the farmhouse without the usual royal procession. Only 2 trusted guards followed at a respectful distance, allowing the journey to feel more like a family matter than a visit from the throne. Every mile seemed longer than the last. Evelyn rehearsed countless questions in her mind, yet none of them mattered as much as the one she truly wanted answered. Why had Adrian believed she could never be trusted with the truth? When the familiar farmhouse finally appeared beyond the apple trees, Adrian was already standing on the front porch. It was as though he had known they were coming long before the sound of horses reached the property. His gray eyes settled first on Evelyn, searching her face for anger or disappointment. Then they met the Alpha King's gaze. Neither brother spoke at first. Years of silence stretched between them without a single word. At last Adrian stepped forward and gave a quiet smile that carried more sadness than joy. "You found me." The Alpha King returned the smile with one of his own. "No," he answered softly. "She did." Adrian looked toward Evelyn. There was no attempt to deny anything anymore. Only quiet acceptance. "I never wanted you to discover that room," he said. Evelyn walked closer until only a few feet separated them. "I know," she replied. "But I also know you never stopped carrying it with you." Adrian lowered his head. "Every day I wondered if telling you would place a target on your life. The fewer people who knew Alexander Thornridge still lived, the safer everyone around me would be." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You trusted me with your heart but not with your burden." Those words lingered in the cool afternoon air. Adrian closed the distance between them. "Because I promised myself that if I ever escaped the palace, I would never ask another person to carry the weight I left behind. I wanted you to know only the man who baked bread beside you, repaired saddles, laughed with neighbors, and dreamed about planting apple trees. That man was never a disguise. He was the happiest version of myself I had ever been." Evelyn finally understood the truth she had overlooked from the beginning. Adrian had not built a false life. He had built the only life that ever felt honest to him. She reached into her pocket and placed the royal signet ring back into his hand. "I never fell in love with a prince," she whispered. "I fell in love with the man who chose kindness when no one was watching." Adrian closed his fingers around the ring but made no attempt to put it on. The Alpha King quietly removed the silver pendant from his coat and handed it to his brother. "The kingdom has survived," he said. "The throne is secure. No one is searching for another ruler anymore. They only miss a brother, a son, and a friend." Adrian looked from the pendant to Evelyn before drawing a slow breath. "Then perhaps it is finally time to stop hiding." For the first time in 3 years, the silence surrounding the farmhouse no longer felt like a place where secrets were buried. It felt like the beginning of a conversation that should have happened long ago, one built not on titles or crowns, but on forgiveness, truth, and the quiet courage of the woman who had refused to let either brother live behind the walls of yesterday. Word of what happened in Blackridge spread across the kingdom far faster than anyone expected. People did not remember the frightened woman who had taken the Alpha King's horse. They remembered the woman who had risked her own reputation so the truth could finally be heard. A week later, the royal court invited the people of Blackridge to the capital for a public gathering, unlike any held in recent memory. Merchants, farmers, teachers, craftsmen, and village elders filled the great courtyard beneath bright autumn skies. Evelyn stood quietly beside Adrian, feeling far more comfortable in her simple blue dress than among polished marble columns and embroidered banners. Nothing about her had changed, yet everything around her had. The Alpha King stepped onto the platform and looked across the crowd before speaking. "A kingdom is strongest when truth is welcomed, even when it arrives in unexpected ways." His voice carried through the courtyard with calm confidence. "For 3 years my brother honored the peace of this realm by asking for nothing in return. He never sought power. He never sought recognition. Today I ask only that his choice be respected." He turned toward Adrian with a warm smile that no longer carried regret. "Welcome home, Alexander Thornridge." Instead of applause for a returning prince, something quieter happened. People bowed their heads not because of his birth, but because they understood the sacrifice behind it. Adrian stepped forward only long enough to shake his brother's hand before gently declining every title that was offered. "My home is not a palace," he said. "It is wherever my wife is waiting with fresh bread and a place at the table." Soft laughter and grateful smiles spread throughout the gathering. The Alpha King nodded without disappointment because, at last, he understood that some victories could never be measured by crowns. Then he walked toward Evelyn, holding the silver reins of the royal stallion. Before the entire court, he placed them carefully into her hands. "This horse carried you to the truth," he said. "May it always remind this kingdom that courage sometimes wears the face of an ordinary person." Evelyn smiled, her eyes meeting Adrian's across the courtyard. The future they had once imagined had not disappeared. It had simply become clearer. They returned to their farmhouse, planted the apple orchard they had dreamed about, and welcomed neighbors exactly as they always had. The hidden room beneath the barn no longer held secrets. It became a place where family history was preserved instead of feared. And whenever travelers passed through Blackridge asking whether the old stories about the missing prince were true, the villagers would simply smile toward the little farmhouse beyond the fields and say that the greatest leaders were not always the ones who chose the throne. Sometimes they were the ones who quietly chose kindness, home, and the people they loved most.